Hello and welcome to the Arsenal Women Arsecast with me, your host Tim Stillman, back again with our co-host Jamie Spanger to go over Saturday's 2-1 defeat at home to Chelsea. And I just want to say that since we started this podcast where we decided to look back at all WSL games on the subsequent Monday, there's only been one win to talk about so far, which in one respect has probably helped the flow of questions, of which we're getting lots and lots for the second half of the show, but probably not the mood we were really looking for to start this kind of new show for the new season off. But Arsenal lost at home 2-1 to Chelsea on Saturday, and we'll talk. I think there's a lot of kind of interesting meat on the bone with this game, of the performance versus the result. Where does that leave things? Don't think it's a very interesting kind of tactical game because of the way it pans out with Chelsea taking the lead so early, but we'll get into all of that and we'll do our usual kind of rundown for those of you who haven't heard before. Jamie and I will spend the first half kind of just talking about the game a little bit, some of the minutiae, some of the things that kind of came out of it, and then the second half we take listener questions from a mixture of Twitter threads and our Arseblog Discord, which you'll get access to if you're a member on Patreon. But without further ado, Jamie, how are you feeling this Monday morning?
Hello, Tim. I think the weather and the torrential rain outside reflects how everyone's feeling in the Arsenal camp right now. But myself, I'm okay and I'm ready to go.
Yeah, I was just saying I did the school run with my daughter this morning in absolute monsoon conditions, and yeah, it did seem to kind of set the tone. And that was around the time I put out the call for questions, and obviously a lot of people with lots of questions about what's happening with Arsenal at the moment, which I think rightly so. I think I've got quite a lot as well, but let's see if we have some answers. But Jamie, before we go into the game and some of the stuff that happened, as it were, as stuff happens in every game, I think one of the things subsequent to this that's kind of, when I say difficult, I don't mean like actually difficult, like open heart surgery or anything like that, but that's slightly kind of difficult intellectually, is separating out this game from the run that Arsenal are on, because it strikes me that this is comfortably the best performance of the last three games. That's a low bar, admittedly, but it's comfortably the best. And Arsenal, I think, played pretty well. And, you know, these games are very, very close, and sometimes they go, sometimes they drop you and sometimes they don't. This one didn't really drop for Arsenal, which I think even in their best form could happen. But how are you able, is anyone able to separate this game out from the kind of funk Arsenal are in? Is it possible for you psychologically to separate those things?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because it's been such a heavy 7 days for Arsenal. But in my opinion, all three performances, that Everton draw and then coming into that Bayern Munich heavy thrashing and then this game, are all completely different performances and probably all have their problems in their own respect. I think this Chelsea game, as a fan, if I'm sitting in the stands as a fan, I think this is probably the hardest one to swallow because, like you said, Tim, I thought it was a strong performance, and I've seen a lot of Chelsea fans and a lot of Chelsea journalists that cover the club have kind of said that was a very poor outing for Chelsea, and there's a lot of questions to be asked of how they managed that second half, especially because Arsenal did look like the bigger team, but at the end of the day, I feel like we've been here so many times before where we're saying, okay, Arsenal were probably the better team with the bigger chances, and on another day that falls in their favour, but it didn't. And we're seeing that repetition, which I think is the only thing that's really the issue for me off the back of that performance, is that it's not an outlier. It's not an, okay, this has happened once, it falls every time. I think this is becoming a trend for Arsenal, and that's the real issue. But performance-wise, it was a good performance, and well, it wasn't a great performance. The defensive woes were absolutely shocking, and we'll speak more about that. But it was a better performance in comparison to the displays they put out against Everton and Bayern Munich.
Yeah, the XG on this game is 2.6 to Arsenal to 1.1 to Chelsea, but I take that with a little bit of a pinch of salt on Chelsea's side, just because when you get that's kind of what you expect when you take the lead after 3 minutes and you're in the lead for, like, let's say this game goes on for 100 minutes and you're in the lead for like 97 of them. That's what's going to happen, particularly when you're 2-0 up early as well. So, like, I do think if this game had been even for longer, or the scoreline had been even for longer, then I think you'd see Chelsea generating a bit more than 1.1 XG. And obviously they're sitting back and, but, to your point, Arsenal underperforming their XG is pretty normal at the moment. And, we'll talk about maybe some of the forwards that Arsenal have shed in the last quite recently. Chloe Lacasse scoring a hat-trick yesterday for Utah Royals. I don't think that made anyone feel any better about Arsenal at the moment. But yeah, and I guess my overall feeling about this as well, Jamie, is that once you go 2-0 down, like Jonas in his press conference, was talking about the effort of the players, in real adversity, really tough week, really tough schedule as well. And not to use that as an excuse, but they play Bayern when Bayern have an extra day. They play Chelsea, who have one fewer game and an extra day. These are hard fixtures for those margins to fall. And then you see the game and the margins do fall for Chelsea again. But I also kind of think that maybe that's, and Jonas put that on the players and said it's down to them. They really fought for this, and that should really give people hope. And I kind of agree with that. At the same time, I kind of think when games get like this, they're not really about the coaches anymore. They're not really tactical. When you're 2-0 down in 12 minutes, it's not a tactical game anymore. And that's why, we haven't done an analysis piece on this, because there's nothing tactical to pick apart. It really does become about one team are 2-0 up and saying we don't have to do anything anymore, and one team are 2-0 down saying we have to throw the kitchen sink at this. And that kind of becomes less about the coaches on the touchline, and it becomes a bit more about the willpower of the players on both sides. And I kind of think that's the contest we saw. So, I don't think the manager can really take that much credit when the game states like that. But what about your feeling before the game, Jamie, about this? Because I had some conversations with some people before the game, and yeah, I'll tell you what I thought before the game. But what about you? How were you feeling coming into this?
Yeah, I think coming into it from an Arsenal perspective, it felt like, just because coming off the back of that Bayern Munich game and the Everton result, it felt like a must-win game for Arsenal. And that's in isolation, I think, because I got to the Emirates and I said, this is a must-win for so many reasons. This is a must-win for Jonas Eidevall. This is a must-win for the players, for the league. You don't want to fall any further behind from Chelsea. But if that's in isolation and that's kind of very circumstantial and depending on what's been happening at Arsenal recently. However, to me as well, when you really take in the whole picture, you're playing Chelsea. It's a London derby. They're a fantastic side. Shouldn't ever really be a must-win. It's just because of the circumstances. And I think I started to think about it, and I had some conversations with people about Chelsea, and I said, this is probably more of a must-win for Chelsea than it is for Arsenal. They've had the extra day. They've got a lot more squad depth right now. They've got players coming back from injury. This is probably more of a must-win for Chelsea, and that made me feel a little bit more eased up. However, it didn't lessen the pressure on Arsenal and how I felt in towards that. However, I think for me, I went into this game and I was like, there needs to be something different. And coming off the back of that Bayern game, it felt as if it was so deflating that last 30 minutes. The players didn't look like they wanted to be there. The manager didn't look like he wanted to be there. So for me, it was like there needs to be an attitude shift in this game. And I think we did see that. I think the players collapsing on the full-time whistle and really, really giving their all for 90 minutes showed that the players were in it for 90 minutes. Maybe not all of them, but a vast majority of them. So that's really what I wanted to see. I had this big expectation on attitude shift for me, but I did view it as Chelsea needs to come out and win this game, and Sonia Bonpastor needs to do something strong today. And I think she did clinch that result, but I don't think the performance was at all what fans really want to see going into these harder games, because they've won in fine margins against Villa. They've won in fine margins against Aston Villa. And we're not against Arsenal, sorry. We're not here to analyse Chelsea, but I felt as if the expectation was probably more on them in a wider picture, although Arsenal needed to see a shift, and I think we did see that mental-wise.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's where some of my frustration is as well. I've watched all of Chelsea's games so far and I haven't been blown away by any of them. I do think Jessie Parker-Humphries made a very, very good point, and they were saying that, obviously this is a new manager, loads of new players in at Chelsea. Like, Chelsea went through their continuity bit a couple of years ago, perhaps when Jonas first arrived, but now they're out the other side. They're a brand new manager. they've been very, very active in the market over the last 3 windows or so. And, Jesse was talking about how I think Chelsea had like 7 players perhaps who weren't there 2 years ago in the starting lineup. Arsenal had 7 that were. For example. And so I do think there's a context there, because I agree with you. I kind of thought Chelsea were there for the taking in the games I've seen so far, and conversations I had before the game. I spoke to Soph from Girls on the Ball, and horrendous name drop alert, but I had a conversation with Faye White before the game as well, who obviously former player, used to work at the club. And this is why when you cover games as a journalist, always get there early, because you do get some interesting conversations. And yeah, I was talking to Faye about that player perspective, and kind of said, I feel like Arsenal need a game like this right now, where it is just going to be because I do feel I've seen heads drop the last couple of games at various times. And my kind of point was, I'd almost prefer this to West Ham at home or West Ham away next week, in terms of you cannot do that against Chelsea. Your head cannot drop. You've got to go for it. And I did feel Chelsea were there for the taking a bit. And for me, the stage that Arsenal were, and probably still are at, it really was an all or nothing game. And I kind of felt you might as well have that now. The situation Arsenal are in, it might as well be clear either way. It might as well, because if Arsenal had won it, potentially that changes the season. Not winning it, to your point, Jamie, and we'll discuss this in the second half, because we've got questions about what Arsenal's actual aspirations for the season are now. But I felt like that clarity was maybe going to be useful either way. But actually, in the end, what we got was a defeat. And Becky Taylor-Gill also of Counterpress put out a jokey tweet about how this was probably the worst outcome for Arsenal, in that they lost, but they didn't lose convincingly or embarrassingly. So it leaves them in a kind of limbo. But I do think that's actually quite right, as much as Becky was kind of taking the piss there a little bit. Let's come on to the starting lineup then, because we did see some changes. We saw Daphne van Domselaar come in. I wasn't hugely surprised by that, because I do think Manu Zinsberger didn't have a great game in Munich in the week. We also had Lotta coming in for Laia Cadena. We went kind of back to Beth and Caitlin out wide, with Mariana in the centre. And actually, Art de Roche asked a really good question of Jonas about this afterwards, which I'll cover off a bit. But were there any surprises in there? And I guess with Mariana playing in the centre, well, the point Art made in his question to Jonas was Mariana has started on the right wing, the left wing, and number 10 in the last 3 games. And Art's question was kind of, to what extent was that about the opponents, and to what extent is that kind of just that Arsenal haven't found those partnerships yet? And Jonas kind of said both. So I guess your impressions of the starting lineup.
Yeah, I wasn't surprised, like you said, Tim, about Daphne van Domselaar starting. I think it was a shaky performance from Zinsberger on Wednesday night, and it's also a short turnaround, so I wasn't surprised by that. Laia Cadena was one I was surprised with, and I don't think we've gotten any update in regards to whether the fact that was an injury concern or whether that was a tactical concern, because in my opinion, I think she's been the strongest and most consistent of the defenders, apart from maybe Emily Fox recently. So that did surprise me a bit. I didn't expect to see her drop to the bench for Lotta, and I think that probably was a mistake in the end, in my opinion. But we'll get further on to that. I think Beth and Caitlin was, again, I wasn't completely surprised by that happening. And we spoke about the Mariana move a little bit last week, Tim, and how and what she can offer from the central areas. I don't think that paid off during this game. However, I do see why that situation was made. I think Arsenal are in this situation now where Jonas, for me, it feels like every week he probably makes the most changes out of any manager in the WSL, and a lot of them aren't injury concerned. And I think he's done that for at least 1 or 2 seasons now. And I don't really know if that's working for him. It doesn't seem like him or the squad really know what their roles are. And that is consistent every single weekend. It feels like there are wholesale changes to the Arsenal lineup. And that is going to hinder the fact that you can't build these relationships. And I don't think Mariana was going to work off the bat. However, I don't think it worked very well. And that's not just her in isolation. I think there's a lot to say about Alessia Russo and Beth Mead, and less so Caitlin Ford. I thought she had a really good game, but the lineup itself, I don't know if the changes really worked. However, on paper, before the starting line, when the lineup came out, I wasn't too surprised.
Yeah, I think Caitlin had to come in. I think she's maybe the only attacker at the moment who looks like herself a little bit, and I think we kind of lack width without her. I'm actually in a weird way. I'm quite happy for Caitlin, albeit in like quite bad circumstances, because I think because like the last couple of seasons she's just played all the time. And I totally get why. Like, I'm not going to sit here and tell you I thought she was at her absolute tip top best last season, but when she comes out, I think you see what Arsenal miss in that player that holds the width really, really well, and you really see her role more clearly. But she hasn't been able to come out of the team because there's been no depth in that position. So my impression of it was I fully expect to see Van Domselaar after Wednesday night. Um, and I thought, and I didn't actually see this happen in the game, but before I was like, okay, I can see why Beth and Caitlin are out wide because you think back to the Lyon game 2 seasons ago, Sonia Bompastor, I don't know why I struggled to say her name so much, is in charge. And Beth and Caitlin eat behind the Lyon fullbacks, like full on bargain bucket meal on each side. I think they both like score twice each. And Sonia's style is very much to push the fullbacks on. Sandy Baltimore's starting at left back. It's an incredibly aggressive move. And I asked Sonia Bompastor about that after the game, actually, because I was kind of expecting to see maybe someone like Eve Perisset start or maybe even Ashley Lawrence. But she really went for it with that Baltimore playing at left back, and in the end Baltimore scores the winner, so you can't really kind of question that. And I thought, okay, they want natural width, they want to get behind those fullbacks, and I thought that's maybe why Lotta started, because she's got a superior kind of crossfield pass. And I thought, okay, I can see what Arsenal are going to try and do here. They're going to try and hit the flanks very quickly. I actually don't think I really saw that in the game, though. I don't know if that was just a game state thing where Chelsea did go 2-0 up and didn't therefore really push their fullbacks on, but I kind of felt that might be the plan. A little bit. We'll come on to, we've spoken a bit about Caitlin there. I think Beth and Leslie Russo are two players kind of worth talking about. But, the game starts, Arsenal doing largely kind of fine, and then having conceded, I don't know, was it 2-3 goals from corners on Wednesday night? Chelsea's first corner, drops to Ramirez in the area. She hooks it over her shoulder. It's 1-0 to Chelsea. I mean, what did you make of that goal overall? And I guess your feeling after it went in?
Well, I didn't even know it was in because the stadium was silent and Daphne Van Domselaar was standing still. So I was like, this has gone far wider over the bar. And suddenly the away end's up in arms. And I was so surprised because from the angle I was looking at, I didn't think it was dropping in. But Myra Ramirez is one of those players that I don't think there's anyone else like her in the WSL. She's a fantastic footballer and she just brings a kind of three-dimensional aspect to Chelsea's front line that Sam Kerr, of course, as an Australian, I think she is one of the best nines the WSL's seen. However, Ramirez brings more to Chelsea, in my opinion, because she's so three-dimensional and she can work in so many different ways. So for her to just overhead kick in the 3rd minute of the game is just bonkers. How many nines? I don't think we'd see an Arsenal 9 try to attempt that. However, I think the goal was quite poor from Arsenal. I think it should have been cleared off the bat. I think it bobbled around a little bit. Millie Bright got something on it, and I don't think she ever should have had the opportunity to do that. And then Daphne Van Domselaar obviously thought it was going over when it wasn't going over and made no attempt to save there. So it felt like Ramirez is a excellent footballer, and I'm not taking that away from her or the goal because it was remarkable. However, I thought it was very poor from Arsenal and very preventable. I didn't think it was a strike that should win her goal of the season because she never should have had the opportunity to score it in the first place. So I think it was a two-way street in terms of how that hit the back of the net.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point about an Arsenal striker wouldn't have taken that on at the moment, and I think you're quite right in that. When I watched this back, I think that there's two kind of crucial things that happen. First of all, Emily Fox slips. She's marking Ramirez. I think you could ask questions about Emily Fox being one who's asked to pick up Ramirez. To your point, I'm not sure anyone can really live with her in the air or on the floor. She's such an awkward player to play against. And I think a big part of the reason Arsenal totally dominate the last half an hour is because she has to go off and Chelsea kind of lose a big outlet at that stage. But Emily Fox slips, and that really costs her the chance to properly compete for the ball. I'm not going to rage about this. I think it should have been a free kick because I think it's a high boot, and Beth Mead is about to head it, and then she pulls her head away because the boot is there, and I think it should have been a free kick. I don't think it should have stood. I kind of understand because there isn't the contact, and maybe if I was being hypercritical, I'd say, Beth, go down holding your face, or flinch or something, and make sure you get that free kick. But I did feel it was a little bit on the slightly our luck is really down at the moment type stage. But then Arsenal come back from that. They go forward. Beth Mead has a header which kind of just goes over, and I'm thinking Chelsea are leaving space for Arsenal to exploit here. I can't say I was mega confident that Arsenal would keep Chelsea out, but I was thinking there's goals here for Arsenal. And then all of a sudden, they're 2-0 down with a Sandy Baltimore header on the back post. And I think here, again, I tweeted a couple of still images of the arrangement of the Arsenal defence for one of Harder's headers on Wednesday night and Baltimore's header here. This one, I think Arsenal are pretty guilty, right?
Yeah, defensively, the fact that you're letting a left back run the field and stand pretty much unmarked. Well, no, not pretty much. She was completely unmarked at the back post. She just had to make contact with it, any part of her body except her hands, and that would have gone in. I think I was at the Chelsea-Real Madrid game midweek when they played at Stamford Bridge in the Champions League, and Sandy Baltimore started at left back that game, and that was the first time she had started at left back for Chelsea, given the fact she did sign in the summer. And Sonia kind of spoke about bringing the similar conversation she had with you, Tim, after the Arsenal game about bringing this more attacking sense to the game. And she is a winger. She's a forward at heart, so she's going to push up. And the fact that Emily Fox is kind of on the penalty spot was crazy to me. And it's a very uncharacteristic lapse of concentration for a player like Emily Fox because she's so switched on. But she's been left on an island by herself with all the free reign in the world because Fox has pulled in. And also Beth Mead, I've seen from the angle, Beth Mead is not marking Nuskin on the top of the box. She's got no one pushing up behind her, of course, because Sandy Baltimore is the left back and she's in front of her. Beth Mead is in this no man's land where the ball's never going to go, and she's not really marking anyone. She had the opportunity to go goal side on Baltimore, and that defensive discipline wasn't there from Arsenal in that play, and we saw that not just from Emily Fox, and I think she's getting a lot of the blame, rightfully so. She should have been marking the back post. However, Beth Mead is kind of doing no job in that scenario. Also, for a player like Lauren James, she obviously beats out the left side of Arsenal. However, she's had time to stabilise herself, look up, pick out the pass in the box. You can't be letting a player as creative and as composed as Lauren James have that time of the ball. So I don't think it's enough to isolate Emily Fox and say, why are we not on Sandy Baltimore? I think the build-up and also players around that goal, it was just poor defending from Arsenal. It was a real lapse in concentration. Like you said, Tim, I thought Arsenal got the better of Chelsea following that Ramirez goal. So it was just a bit of a disappointing, sigh, slap your knee.
Yeah, definitely. I think if you look at the real build up to the goal, it comes again from Ramirez on the dribble, and what happens essentially is both Leah Williamson and Lotte Wubben-Moy go out to her because that is the kind of player Ramirez is. You kind of do need two players to try and stop her, so they both get kind of sucked out. That's why Emily Fox kind of comes in and marks Guro Reiten. And for me, the failure there is one of communication, because I think it's completely explicable that Emily Fox shuffles over, but someone should be shouting at Beth Mead, that means you go to the back post now. And Beth, like you say, I don't know if maybe she can see Nushkin over her shoulder and is thinking, I've got to protect that run. But once your defence rearranges like that, and that does happen in games, and it will happen when you've got great dribble. Like you look at Chelsea's forward line, like the dribbling ability of Ramirez, Lauren James, Canarid, these are all players who can carry the ball, and they are going to pull you out of shape, and it will happen several times in a game, and you might not be punished every time, but really someone, like when Emily Fox goes to Guro Reiten, she should be shouting at Beth Mead, like, you go to the back post. And to be fair, Beth should probably know that as well. And you can see I think Jonas Eidewell and Beth Mead have a conversation after that goal. And it might just be because Beth, she's playing on the right wing. She's like next to the dugout, but I wouldn't mind betting that they had like an exchange of views over that. But after the goal, Jamie, we see like a huddle from the players. And I mean, what was your feeling at that moment? Were you feeling, oh my God, this could get very, very bad very, very quickly?
Yeah, that was my thought. I can't lie, Tim. I thought this will be a very interesting, long 90 minutes in this seat. I just thought, I think you can't let teams like Chelsea get away with easy goals like that, because they are so good at working for their goals, and they're such a composed team, and they're so threatening. So when you're giving them easy ones like that, it makes for a very long afternoon. So I was not confident. However, following that, we did see a little bit momentum shift at the back of the first half, and then very much so in the second half. But if we're talking the 30 seconds following that ball hitting the back of the net, I thought this is going to be a very long afternoon, because you cannot be granting Chelsea easy shots like that.
Yeah, it really felt to me like we might get the corner flag tweet, the final whistle kind of time, basically, because, but, full credit to the players. I think like they don't allow that to happen. I think Chelsea do sit off. But like I said, even before those two goals, I do think Chelsea gave Arsenal a bit of hope, because Arsenal were getting in behind them, particularly on the wings. I think Caitlin was comfortably the best player on the pitch. She wins the Supporters Club Player of the Match, and that always kind of restores my faith in, not restores my faith, I guess, like retains my faith in democracy when stuff like that happens, because you're like, yep, you've seen the game I've seen, well done. But Caitlin's goal just before half time, I mean, that feels really pivotal. And I guess your impressions of that goal and just Caitlin's performance overall, because like I said, I think of all the attackers, she's the one who kind of looks herself at the moment.
Yeah, it's been really nice and rewarding to watch Caitlin recently, because I think it's a player that's gained a little bit of confidence, and she's back to knowing what she can do. Like you said, Tim, she's been overplayed, and I'm no way saying that last season she was an exceptional player, but she had her positive moments, and I think she maybe got a little bit more smack than she probably deserved in some games. However, I do see the dip, so I think it's been really nice. And amidst this kind of turmoil of what Arsenal's going through, it's very impressive for her to be able to be on this confidence run. The goal itself is exactly what Arsenal needed, and I think I have very strong opinions on the Rosa Kafaji matter, and as well as the hole that Victoria Pelova has left. That I kind of voiced my opinions on Twitter, and it was nice to see Izzy Christensen actually echoed that yesterday on Sky Sports. But I think what Arsenal needed in that moment was a player to pick out the weakness of Lucy Bronze is slow on foot at the moment. I need to dribble. I need to carry possession myself to force this Chelsea line to be broken. Because you're not passing through Kadisha Buchanan and Millie Bright, and that's what Arsenal kind of tried to do. And the wingers weren't really carrying the ball by foot, and it was exactly what Ford needed to do. She's beaten out Buchanan and Bronze, and then she's just cut back and she's done it herself. And I think it was exactly what Arsenal needed in that moment. It was really positive from her. I really would have liked maybe the team to get around her a little bit more, because it was 2-1. It was before halftime. I don't know if we need to be running to the back of the net, picking up the ball and taking it back to the spot. I think it was just really her celebrating on her own, and that really summed up the afternoon for me, in my opinion, because I think it was a great individual effort, and she deserved her flowers.
Yeah, definitely. And I detected like the thing I like about the goal as well is just like how assertive it is, because she got to that byline several times and there was no one really running onto the cutbacks or anything like that. And it was a real kind of fuck this kind of goal, like going to do it myself. And in those moments you need that sometimes. And I think, I think she's really kind of finding a place in this, because I think like the understanding when Beth Mead and Mariona out wide just isn't quite there yet, whereas like Caitlin I think gives you that certainty of being quite wide and staying there, and that changes the feeling clearly at half time. It changes the team talks, and it changes what the second half turns into really, which is maybe attack v defence. Like I think Chelsea did have some threat on the counter still, but they lose it when Ramirez has to come off injured. I think they made quite a bad decision to take Lauren James off as well. I think I kind of think if you're going to lose one really elite dribbler in Myra Ramirez, you keep your other one in Lauren James on. Although I get that maybe Sonia Bompastor thought that, Lauren James isn't as effective going back towards her own goal. I kind of get that. But, so half time, come into the second half, and I was going to say, actually, sorry, on that Caitlin goal as well, there's a bit of a half chance, I think, at 2-0 where Kim Little passes the ball into the area, and initially Russo and Mariona make the same run, which I think tells you the understanding's not there, but then they rejig a little bit. Mariona carries on her run, Russo comes back, and Kim Little finds the ball into Russo, and actually Mariona's taken a defender away and Russo can turn and shoot, but she immediately touches the ball back. And I think that really shows you where her confidence is at the moment, and just a little bit where the understanding's not quite there, but at the same time, the confidence isn't. But we'll come on to Russo in a minute because she has a chance in the second half. But, Arsenal do their kind of relatively usual substitution. They bring Stina on, Russo goes to the right wing, and, Arsenal are really attacking. And I guess before we go into some of the chances, where do you pitch the second? And this was a question I asked Jonas about whether there was just a lack of confidence sometimes in that final action, or whether Arsenal just did get varianced a little bit and were a little bit unlucky. What do you think you saw in that second half in terms of Arsenal trying to find that second goal? Because they were getting into Chelsea's final third pretty well. And then you have that, the Stina. There's an instant where Stina kind of dribbles into the area and the shot's on, and then she tries to give the ball to Frida Mornham and it goes out of play. And I was sat next to Susie Rack, and I'm sure she won't mind me saying that she lost press box composure at that particular second, and I felt like that kind of summed things up as well. Just I feel like usually Stina takes that shot, and it felt to me like you could see a lack of confidence in the players, even if their approach play was okay.
Definitely. I think it's a bit of both in terms of how Arsenal performed in the final third in the second half. I think, like you said, that Stina opportunity, and when she kind of cuts it back, as well as that Russo one where she taps it back rather than turning, it's just a really big sign that the number 9s at Arsenal right now are so low on confidence. And as a striker, any striker will tell you it's a confidence position. In my opinion, if I was a professional footballer, I would want to play any position but being a striker. Because when you're in a trough and when you're in these kind of hard moments, it's really hard to build up confidence. And that was so significant and so representative of how I think Stina and Russo are performing based on their confidence levels right now. I think that Arsenal did both. I think there was chances that they created quite creatively, but a lot of that came from the left side, in my opinion. I also thought Katie McCabe had a great game. I think maybe defensively there was a little bit of lapses, but it's hard. They're playing against world-class strikers. But I think McCabe, I think it was 4 free kicks she put into the area, and all 4 of them could have been goals. All 4 of the deliveries were near perfect. Obviously, Stina puts one into the bar. We'll speak about that. But I think there was a lot of ability for Arsenal to break down and shuffle the Chelsea defence, and it all came down to that final action. And that's something we repeat, but it came down to this lack of confidence where maybe they're not even just missing their chances, they're actually not taking them because there's someone that needs to grab on the responsibility. And like you said, Tim, that's what Caitlin Ford did in the first half. It was an assertive goal because she took the responsibility that the other strikers, even Beth Mead on the wing, aren't taking right now. So I thought Arsenal they really put on there was some strong creative displays in the second half. There was also some lackluster performances. I think Russo had so many chances on the right wing. We'll speak about that where she crosses it to no one. However, I think they were able to break down the Chelsea defence, but this confidence is exactly where Arsenal are going wrong because it's not the finished product right now. It's also just they're not taking the chances to begin with.
Yeah, definitely. And, where Arsenal do get varianced, as it were, as Stina hits the bar, and that is unlucky. And in many respects, the story of the game is that Ramirez hooks one over her shoulder and it drops in. And Blackstenius connects with, as you said, another good Katie McCabe delivery. And it hits the underside of the bar. And in many respects, sometimes football is just like that, I'm afraid. Sometimes for all of the kind of tactical manoeuvrings, the bigger picture stuff, should the manager stay, should the manager go, all completely valid kind of questions. Particularly these big games, they do come down to that sometimes, and you get on the right end of those sometimes. Don't get me wrong, Arsenal have been on the right end of some of those in the bigger games, like the Conti Cup final in March. Lauren James goes through 1-on-1, it hits Zinsberger's thigh and just goes wide. Blackstenius through 1-on-1, Hannah Hampton gets a hand on it, goes in, and that's the story of that game. But when that Steiner shot hit the bar, it really did have a feeling of like, oh my god, this just isn't our day. And then there's a Russo volley, which is a good connection, which Hannah Hampton saves. But I mean, why don't we talk about then in terms of the forwards and the lack of confidence? I mean, there's a lot of merit in debating individual player form, but I think you can, like, Beth Mead comes off in the 66th minute. Like, that does not happen under any circumstances if Beth Mead is playing near her best. When you're 2-1 down, like, Arsenal never bring Beth Mead off, but they do in this game. And she's been on the bench and come back into the team, and you can see that's because she is not playing at her full potential. And in isolation, that might just happen. But you've got exactly the same thing with Russo as well. And I guess maybe a slightly leading question, Jamie, but when that happens, when you've got multiple players, particularly multiple attacking players who are low on confidence, I don't really see where else you can look other than the manager.
Yeah, it's so hard to say that, because I think we got so many questions, Tim, saying like, why is the team so low on confidence? And it would be very easy for me and you to like pretend we have the answer to that, but we don't see what happens in the back room, and we don't really see what's going on with the culture of the club right now. But it's a wholesale thing. Bar Caitlin Ford, I think the entire team right now is down on confidence. Saw that even with Emily Fox after the full-time whistle. A player that has been so consistent is also down on confidence and is devastated. Which, you're a professional athlete, you want to win, I get it, but it feels like right now Caitlin Ford is probably the only player that is bouncing into the training ground, and that is a culture thing, and that's always going to be a culture thing. And it's hard right now with Arsenal because you can have as many tactical conversations about players as possible, but my honest example of it is Alessia Russo, because I remember when she put pen to paper to sign for Arsenal, I was like, this is it. This is absolutely it. And I can imagine, as much as people would like pretend that they didn't think that, I think so many people were so stoked about that move, because she was such a threatening and confident player at Manchester United. And she is now not even taking her chances in front of goals. And like you said, Tim, like what your leading question did suggest, I think it's a cultural backroom issue, and the players are down on their luck right now. And although they're trying, it feels as if they're not backing themselves individually as well, and then that spreads across the entire team, and that comes to fruition in little amount of goals and little amount of attempts at even scoring.
Yeah, Arsenal had an issue in attack last season. The goals scored column shows you that's why they didn't challenge for the league. That's the single biggest reason, by quite a long distance, and it's kind of getting worse. What about the post-match press conference then? Like, I tried to explain this. I say explain this. That sounds a bit dismissive. I tried to say this to people, and like, Jonas is always, I think, mega rational, mega sober. Like, I can't ever remember coming out of any post-match Jonas press conference and thinking, oh, what was he talking about there? Like, I pretty much think he always gets the diagnoses of the game spot on. Obviously, that's not like a KPI on his job, so I'm not saying that, like, therefore he should keep his job, because he's quite good explaining things in press conferences. But, he obviously, the questions get quite harsh at that stage. Like, he's asked if he's been given any assurances over his future, doesn't really answer it, but kind of says, look, all I can control is the preparation for Wednesday night, which I think probably tells you no, he hasn't had assurances. And I'm not necessarily saying he should have, but then he's asked about like the fan frustration, and I think gives like a very kind of honest answer where he said, I completely understand, like, our fans give us everything, and I can't complain if they're frustrated or anything like that. But so he's always been incredibly, I think, rational and sober after games, and I'm trying not to impose narratives too much. I felt like a sadness as well, actually, which I don't think I've really seen before with Jonas, and again, understandable because it's been a rough week. But how did you feel, in that press conference, and maybe some of the comments afterwards?
100% agree, Tim. I'm glad you brought up the press conference, because I think despite loss, especially after some of the hard ones last season, that North London derby was one. I think that the Chelsea loss at Stamford Bridge was another big one. Jonas, like you said, Tim, he shows up to press conferences with a very stoic demeanor, and he's very analytical straight off the bat in the full-time whistle, irregardless of performance or loss. He knows what just happened, and he knows how to address that. And he really he's one of the managers, because you'd be surprised, some of them don't in the WSL. There are a few that give such in-depth answers to questions and analytical viewpoints. And I think Jonas, that's one of his strengths in terms of just media training, whatever that is, or just an eye for the game. But on Saturday, it felt like there was something strange in the air. His answers were a little bit shorter, and it's like he didn't really have the headspace to be able to even look in depth to that. And like you said, I do not want to write any narratives or give anyone any kind of ideas of what I'm suggesting here, but it felt very, very low in there. He felt very defeated. He felt like he didn't really have the answers to the questions. I also thought his answers were a little bit more emotion-based rather than tactical-based, and we saw that especially with the question in regards to how the fans are feeling. He was very, very beaten up and defeated, which you would be, whereas normally he would probably attack that answer in a more of, this is how we're going to face Valorenga and this is how we're going to use this. And it didn't feel as if that was the way. And I remember it ending, and I looked to the person next to me and I was like, whew, that was harsh. He felt defeated, and as you would, but it did seem like a big dramatic shift as to what we usually see after games like that, and performances that were, as a whole, it was a positive performance.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think emotion's exactly the right word. It felt a bit more emotional, and he said, look, I'm hurting, the players are hurting, and again, that's all I'd be incredibly worried if he wasn't. But at the same time, I don't feel like I've seen that. I guess because we haven't had a week this bad, probably since he arrived. So in many ways, it's a little bit unprecedented. But I did feel like when he said, I'm hurting as well, I could see it. And I don't think I've seen that before. I think his demeanour has always been a little bit more impenetrable than that. And again, I'm not necessarily saying that critically, because forgive me if you think I'm softballing here, but I think we sometimes underestimate these are people, and they're going through wherever your position on the manager or anything, it's harsh. It is harsh. It's harsh when you're in the room and it's God, this person in front of me knows that they might lose their job pretty soon, and that kind of colours everything a little bit. It makes it a bit more personal and human. Again, I'm not saying any of this that fans should really take that into account. It's not their not their place to do so. But I don't think you can really ask that of fans anyway. But yeah, it was the atmosphere was heavy. I'd say particularly coming after Sonia Bompastor's press conference, which had a bit more levity to it. A reporter thinking she had a cold when actually she had to say, no, broke my nose a couple of times as a player, so sorry, I always sound like this. But before we go into the break and the questions, then I think it's kind of worth talking about a little bit about another interview, because Beth Mead was in the mix zone afterwards. I wasn't in the mix zone, but she talked about the need for people to help and pick the team up, which I think was really widely misinterpreted as a bit of a dig at supporters, when I think, which she clarified subsequently, actually I'm talking about trolls essentially online. And I think Beth gets a lot of that, quite frankly. But I guess what did make of her interview, like I guess her form at the moment, and then narrative's going to narrative. Chloe Lacasse goes and scores a hat trick, which doesn't feel helpful. Sorry, Chloe. Like nothing against you, but just I guess Beth's interview and the reaction to that.
Yeah, I remember watching the video, and at first I hadn't read any of the like discourse around it or the voices around it, but I think as a fan, if I'm like completely taking myself away from any analytical point of view, if my team is underperforming, and I've seen this a lot with the AFL, so the Australian football team I follow, they have been bad for 20 years. Like, if you guys think this week has been bad, wow, try be an Essendon fan. And I think I've had a lot of frustration with players kind of saying, oh, criticism does really bother us because, like, we need you to hype us up, because it comes to a point as a fan where you're like, you're a paid professional athlete. It is on you to perform at a high level, and the fans can't do that for you. However, I also think some of the criticism is awful, and this is a human being playing football, and I just don't think any performance should ever lead to some of the stuff I've read being said to Beth Mead. And I don't think she was having a dig at anything or speaking about anything that I've just said. I think she was basically saying, this is a hard period. We need you to stick with us because we need your support. That's what sport's about. You follow your team through the good and the bad. However, I think as a fan, if you interpret it in the way that we need you to be nicer, as a sport fan, I think that it's on a professional athlete that's getting paid to do that job, to perform. And the fans can't do anything about that. However, I don't think that's what Beth Mead was saying.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's quite clear she was kind of talking about like the, online trolls and stuff, and I think you've got to kind of absorb the fact that it's a spoken word interview straight after a football game. Straight after a football game you've lost, so you're incredibly tired, probably a bit pissed off. So like maybe you don't articulate every single syllable. And set everything out and have your appendices and your caveats in your head kind of thing. So, I agree. I think some of the stuff that particular player gets, I find it a bit strange, to be honest, but it is what it is. And her form, like I said earlier, it's clearly not there at the moment. And if it was just her, then I think that would be on her, but it's not. And when you're in the fourth season of a manager, like the scales of and the fault lines, I think, become a lot clearer. But we've got loads and loads of big picture questions in the second half. So this first half, almost exactly the same length as the first half of the game, actually. So why don't we take a break here, and we will come back after the break with some of your questions. Okay, we're back with part 2 of the Arsenal Women Arsecast with me, Tim Stillman, and our co-host Jamie Spanger. And Jamie, obviously lots and lots of the questions, very, very big picture. There's one, because we've had loads of them, I kind of want to address as a general off the bat, and forgive me, I'm not going to credit a particular Twitter, Threads, Discord user with this, because we just had loads and loads of them, but loads of people asking about potential replacements if you own a side of ours not long for Arsenal. Casey Stoney was at the game and made it known she was at the game. I have to say, like, I kind of think if there was anything in that, I don't think she would have tweeted that. So I suspect that's quite innocent. But loads of people asking about, like, who would you get next? And I mean, I have a take on this, but which is I don't know, essentially, but I'll explain why I don't know. Do you have any kind of sense or take on that?
I could not give you a quick fix, Tim, and I think that's got so much to do with all this discourse, because I am in no way rejecting it. I often empathise and or echo the opinion about the manager right now at Arsenal. However, I think it's very easy to say, get the manager out. Okay, what do you do tomorrow morning? You got 2 games this week. What do you do tomorrow morning? And I think if Arsenal were prepared for that, then there may have been a decision made on his future. But there's so often in sport where you see clubs sack the manager in the middle of a crisis and then often get worse because they don't have a plan. And the international break maybe arises for Arsenal as a good time to forge a plan going forward. But I can empathise with the fact that the message that is being sent by the fans, I echo that in many ways. So I'm not saying that at all. But I think for me, I understand why that hasn't been hasn't happened on the final whistle on Saturday, because if there's not a plan in place, it's often a worse idea to just say, get him out, because what you're going to do tomorrow morning when matters become you have 2 games in 6 days.
Yeah, I think on the coaching staff, there are 2 people there who have head coach experience. In Mel, I've forgotten her married name. Was Mel Phillips? She got married this summer, and she has a double barrel surname which escapes me at the moment. And Renee Sleggers, who actually took over from Jonas at Rosengård. So in terms of like an interim solution, there is potentially one there. So yeah, like when I say this, I'm not necessarily saying that therefore Arsenal shouldn't act or whatever. I don't know about a replacement. Like the coaching pool in women's football is still a bit of a mystery to me. Other leagues just aren't visible enough yet. And I didn't know who Shelley Kerr was when Arsenal appointed her. I'd never heard of Pedro Loza when Arsenal appointed him. I didn't really know about Joe Montemuro when Arsenal appointed him. And I didn't really know about Jonas when he was appointed. So like, I'm afraid I don't have any answers to that, because I just don't really have a sense of the coaching pool. And I kind of think Chelsea, when I say this, I don't mean it was therefore it was a bad appointment, but like the Chelsea job was up and everyone knew it was up for months and months and months, because Emma Hayes, made that known well before the end of the season. And Chelsea went for the Lyon manager, which is quite, again, I don't want this to sound pejorative, it's unimaginative, but like they didn't pull someone out of nowhere. They got the Lyon coach, and a Lyon coach who I think that when I say there were issues, I mean relative to Lyon as well. Like, I guess what I'm saying is it's not like a massive or substantial pool, and I don't think anyone outside of the game has enough knowledge really to make that call about like who it should be. Because let's say he does go, whoever it's going to be, I think there's a very strong chance it's not someone and not someone you're going to really have heard very much about. That's just still where the game is. But
can I say something on that Mel Phillips matter, Tim? I think as well, I've seen so many people call for Mel Phillips because, like you said, she's a name that people know in the coaching staff, and I think she's a very valuable asset to Arsenal in the back room. But I remember like watching her play at Brighton. If Arsenal are having issues, manager Brighton, if Arsenal are having issues with confidence up front right now and being ruthless in opportunities, I don't think Mel Phillips is the backroom answer. And I think Brighton played a very, very reserved game of football under Mel, and it was very much so they could not capitalize on chances. They had no confidence going forward. So I think fans are very quick to find a name that they know is familiar and say that is the solution. I don't know if Mel Phillips is the solution. I'm not saying as a whole that is her coaching style, but I think going off the back of what we learned from her at Brighton, it was a very short tenure, and I think it was the issues she had at Brighton are the issues that Arsenal are having right now. So I don't know if she is the answer, but I don't know enough about Renee Sleggers, and I think that could be an opportunity for interim going forward.
Yeah, and there's possibly an argument that just in the short term, like sometimes when it gets like this, as an interim for a few games, if indeed like there are issues with the atmosphere or whatever, there probably is an argument just for saying, well, just someone else for a few games, and then we'll work out who it is long term. I think a lot of people saying Casey, Stoney as well, and to your point, I kind of think that's just because that's someone we know who's not coaching at the moment. I mean, Mark Parsons as well, he's someone who's not coaching at the moment. But I mean, Casey's record, if you're looking at improving the attack, Casey's record so far is not someone you'd really look at. But at the same time, like, I don't know enough about the situation at San Diego Wave. Quite a lot of people kind of saying, well, actually, it's Jill Ellis's recruitment, and you can only judge on what people have to work with. And Casey Stoney had Manchester United at a very different time when they'd just been promoted. So, like, maybe there was more of a cause for defensive football, but I don't think she hasn't proved yet that she can be a good attacking coach. That's not to say she can't be, but yeah, I do think there's an element of that's a name that's familiar to us. Like I said, if indeed Jonas Eidebauer is replaced soon, I almost guarantee you that the replacement is going to be someone that we're probably not that familiar with. Do you want to start with a question for me?
Yeah, definitely. So this one's from Twitter. It's from @throwin_. It says, Arsenal reverted to their more traditional lineup last season of Volti, Little and Lutterwolper Moy. Only new to the lineup was Mariona. Do you think familiarity is the way to build back up confidence and maybe be more open to changing in-game than the lineup?
Yeah, this is an interesting one. I had a similar one actually marked from Eileen at Eileen EST. Has Jonas become too conservative and predictable in his choices? Feels like the plan for these games is the same as it was 3 years ago, just as most of the players from 3 years ago, but they're all 3 years older. Yeah, I think there's something in that. The average age of the starting lineup, I think, was about 29 again, and that's happening quite often, and that kind of tells you that there's going to have to be some kind of rebuild quite soon, and that actually that might make it quite an opportune time to make a managerial change, because you could take the view, actually, we need to kind of freshen this up a little bit with some younger players. And yeah, I do think that maybe when coaches get into these situations, they kind of show you who they trust and what they really think. And I think we spoke about this after the Häcken second leg, where Leovolti comes in for Cairo Cooney Cross, because that's a game where Jonas's job is probably on the line, that Häcken second leg, and he brought Leovolti back into the team. And I completely understand that. I would have done the same thing. But I think a lot of these kind of questions probably refer mainly to that midfield double pivot, maybe the wide players as well. Beth and Caitlin, I think, are both 29 years old. And I mean, the answer is those positions are just going to need freshening up quite soon. The Volti little thing, yeah, I think that does show you that perhaps Jonas still has some doubts over Kyra in the bigger games, and to your point, Victoria Pelova is a significant hole there as well. And yeah, like, managers tend to show you who they really trust in these moments, and I do think that potentially says something. But it's weird, isn't it? Because we also have questions, and I think they're both completely justifiable. We also have questions about, and we spoke about, like, things changing too much, and so you've had like Mariana in 3 different positions in the last 3 games, and new centre back pairing in this game, and there isn't a lot of continuity, and there's a really fine line between the necessary rotation at a top team and kind of reaching for stuff because nothing's really working. And I do feel a little bit like we're in the latter category, where it's more a symptom of we're trying to find things that work. And yeah, I do think I understand people's reservations about the midfield double pivot, for example, but at the same time, I don't see the depth there at the moment to do an awful lot else. And that could be a squad building failure, and that could explain why we were trying to spend the family silver on Kira Walsh over the summer. But I kind of think both things are justifiable, and that kind of tells me that things just aren't working, basically. Why don't I ask you this question, because I know you hinted at this in the first half, and this is from Yana at Yana DW_. I get she isn't a starter straight away, but what was the point in signing a player like Kafaji if you don't bring her on against Chelsea and Everton when you need a goal? And more generally, what is the plan of the club when it comes to incorporating young players? Catherine Kuhl is another example. I think you could say Gio is another example as well. So where do you kind of stand on the not really seeing Rosa Kafaji even in game states where Arsenal need to score a goal?
Yeah, honestly, Tim, I can't really sit here and find a solution or an answer to that question, because I am equally as baffled as the person that asked this question. I think, in my opinion, it was the same in the Everton game. We spoke about it last week really briefly about Victoria Pelova being a bit of a hole, and I noticed it really a lot this week against Chelsea. And I think someone mentioned on Twitter, because I put a tweet out following the game, and I was a bit emotional about the result, obviously, and I said this Victoria Pelova gaping hole is big. And someone said, I think that fans believe that the loss of players is bigger in strife. But I do think Victoria Pelova is a massive loss. I think she's a player that can ball carry through the central areas. That not only breaks down the last line because she attracts defenders, it means that the wingers and the 9 have more space because the centre-backs have to come towards her. Whereas right now, Arsenal are just trying to play by foot. And I expected Caldente to maybe be more of that creative player. But to me, the closest player to Victoria Pelova right now is Rosa Kafaji. We saw it in the preseason a lot. She's this kind of ball baller that has the ball at her feet and breaks down defenders by carrying possession and then playing it forward. Right now, I think Arsenal have a lot of players that are just getting the ball at their feet and looking for the first pass straight away, and that's not what you need against a team like Chelsea. You want to draw Brighton Buchanan towards you so you can then open up Caitlin Ford, Beth Mead, and Alessia Russo in and behind, rather than them all being in this stagnant line. You're not going to break through a defence as organised as Chelsea in that matter. So I think the Kafaji one is so baffling to me because obviously the Swedish league, she was a BK Häcken. It's still in season right now, but it ends before the WSL. They've got the winter break off, so maybe there was maybe there was an option to make a move for her in January rather than now if she's going to sit on the bench, because she's not playing against Everton, she's not playing against Chelsea. They're two completely different opponents in two completely different games. I just think I don't understand the Rosa Kafaji one, and it actually does really frustrate me because I think she is an exact player that is something that Arsenal need right now for a creative aspect by foot, rather than trying to break down the last line by pass. So I don't have an answer because I'm equally as baffled as everyone else is. And I think we're very much feeling the whole of Victoria Pullover lately.
Yeah, I think with Kafaji, I think the question's spot on, really, particularly because Arsenal didn't make all their available subs in this game. So last week when I asked it after the Everton game, Jonas talked about there are a couple of defenders I had to get on and I had to get off, and that took substitutions away. Not the case on this occasion. And I think ultimately there's one number 10 position. It was Frida Mornham who came on. And at that point, it's either going to be Frida or Rosa. I think maybe, Russo finishes the game on the right wing. You could ask the question as to whether Rosa Kafaji could have taken that position. But I think that's right. And I do think that's possibly always been a bit of a black mark, actually, under Jonas. Sometimes the recruitment does feel a little bit confused. And what is the plan for these players, particularly the younger players, the more precocious talents, and certainly not being answered at the moment. Your turn to ask me a question, isn't it?
Yeah, I've got one from Deborah Duke. It's just at Deborah_Duke. Given every match is a crucial one right now, in what circumstances with Cool, Kafaji and the Academy girls get minutes, and will Cool walk if she doesn't? I think this is a good question, Tim, because it's true. I think going into this Vålerenga midweek game, it was supposed to be, Vålerenga at home was supposed to be Arsenal's easiest game of the group stage, and now it's a must-win and probably by a large margin. So I'm interested when you see where do these players kind of get their go, and how does Jonas test those younger players right now?
Yeah, I think this Vålerenga game probably has been earmarked for a while for quite a few changes. And yeah, like I would expect to see, for example, Kul Cooney Cross, maybe Frida in the 10 and Rosa Kafaji out wide, but I definitely expect to see Catherine Cool, Kyra Cooney Cross, Rosa Kafaji all starting, Steph Catley probably as well. I think Lena Hurtig will be fine to be on the bench, but I'm seeing where possible kind of mass changes here. Be really interested to see what Arsenal do at right back, because I think they'd really like to give Emily Fox a day off, but it's not really clear who they'd start there. But yeah, I do think we'll see it in that game, but it's perhaps reminiscent of the last Pedro Loza game in charge was a Conti Cup game against London Bees, and it was a very similar stage of the season and very, very similar kind of circumstances. And actually what Pedro did in that game was he put his full 11 out and won 7-0. And I remember asking him about it, and he kind of said, we needed the confidence. We needed a big win, behind us. So it could be that Jonas does that. I do think with the schedule recently, that will kind of guide the decision, and we will see some changes. Longer term, again, I've said many times, if I were Catherine Cull, I'd have looked for a move over the summer, I have to say, because I don't see too many other opportunities for her. Like West Ham really, really is like, on the eve of the international break. That's a really, really big game for the manager. And I do think if he doesn't win it, he's probably gone. And so I don't see Rosa Kafaji or Catherine Cull or Kyra Cooney Cross starting that game. And it does rather beg the question of what the long term of some of these players is. And I think it's been kind of similar for Frida as well a little bit. She wasn't actually signed as a number 10. She's kind of ended up there. She's been a little bit in and out. ever since. And she's another one who's probably been one of Arsenal's better players this season. It doesn't really feel like there's ever been like a really solid plan for her. And I do think that's, that's potentially a bit damning of some of Arsenal's recruitment. And on that score, we've had a couple of questions about this, and I have views on this, but quite big picture stuff. So one from at @Topia_Cruz on Twitter. Why is Clare Wheatley's position not under scrutiny? To me, she and the team are 70% part of our current problems, from bad player recruitment to awarding holding players that are past their prime. And this one from Threads at AliBoy82. I think it's fair to say fan confidence in Clare Wheatley as sporting director is low, with some not clear on what she does. We don't know her vision for the club, and she doesn't really give us updates currently. Do you agree it would be best if she spoke to the fans in an interview 2 to 3 times a season like Edu does on the men's side? So these are some pretty big picture questions about Clare Wheatley, which I think a lot of people are asking. What's your view on that, Jamie?
Yeah, I was having a similar conversation like this with someone walking home from the game on Saturday. And I think right now, all the fans are really begging for is transparency. And it doesn't feel like there's any of that at Arsenal right now. And it's very easy, and I'm not making any dig. So if there's a Manchester United fan listening to this podcast for whatever reason in your spare time, please do not get mad at me. Because I know they're 3 for 3, I understand that. But the men's and the women's team at the end of last season, it felt like they were going through a similar thing, where there was a bit of turmoil, there was disorganization, obviously with Sir Jim Ratcliffe coming in, and he basically said they're not prioritizing the women's team at all. But at Arsenal, that's not the issue. It's not a club-wide issue. You've got the men's side that's working very, very well and strongly right now, and I think that you've got the women's side, which feel as if there is many glaring backroom issues that are past just the players and Jonas Eidevall. So to me, it's not a full club issue. It's not like the club needs to be ripped up and let's just start again, like maybe when Mikel Arteta came in for Unai Emery. That was a bit of, maybe that's what we're seeing with the women in the future, but for me, it feels like the women's side are really failing in comparison to the men's side. And a lot of that comes down to your director of football and whatever Clare Wheatley does in the back room right now, I don't think there's no transparency. And the fans don't really know what she's doing. And when there is something going on like a bad week like this, of course, fans are going to turn to that person and say, hey, what's going on? Because we haven't heard from you. So as far as I know, it could be you. And as far as I know, I don't know Clare Wheatley personally, but I think that is a very valid concern. And I echo and empathize with that concern, because right now it feels as if there's a bit of disorganization. I think that big bid for Kira Walsh is another example of that. You don't necessarily need Kira Walsh. Every team would love Kira Walsh, but you don't need them. Arsenal needs someone more than her right now in a different position. So it's that lack of transparency for me, and I think it's causing issues with fans, rightfully so, because they're saying, well, this is going wrong and I haven't heard from you. I don't actually know what you do. And are you a part of the bigger problem? Because it's not just the manager, it's the whole club. And I think they need to look at the men's side and say, okay, that's working out. How do we become one club and how do we mirror that? Because right now at Arsenal, it seems as if it's very quiet and it's very, very, a lot of whispers and we're not really sure of who's doing what.
Yeah, definitely. And Richard Garlick is kind of Claire's line manager, as I'd kind of position it. And Arsenal did a lot around recruitment after summer 2022 and January 2023. Didn't go right. Jonas Eidevall was very public about that and said, this was not good enough. We didn't get nearly enough out of our recruitment, and they made some some additional kind of tweaks around personnel in there. I think the thing is, when it comes to something like Claire, we get questions about Kelly Smith as well. It's like the attack's not doing that well, so what's Kelly doing? And it's a bit like, I think the thing is, it's impossible to be firm about that unless you're there every day. So I can't sit here and tell you that Clare Wheatley is the problem, because I don't know. None of us know that. The players, the other, like the people inside the club, will have their opinions on that. I cannot have an opinion on that because I don't know. And I don't say that critically or pejoratively. I don't know what Polly Bancroft did every day at Manchester United. I don't know what Nils Nilsson did every day at Manchester City. I don't know what Paul Green does every day at Chelsea. We don't know because we're not there. Like with the manager, it's much clearer because it's like you train the team and we see the output on the pitch, and that's the thing that really matters. But I can't sit here and tell you that there have been recruitment management errors and things like that. But I can't firmly sit here and tell you that Clare Wheatley is the problem, and that's why I think Alistair's additional question is really, really useful and helpful in terms of the communication side of things. Claire did do an interview with ESPN over the summer when the team were in Washington, quite US faced. I think ESPN did a lot with Jonas and Clare Wheatley, but I definitely think even like club level communication, if it's an interview with the Arsenal website, if it's internal. I think, for example, around the Vivian Miedema decision at the end of last season, Jonas getting booed in Melbourne and things like that. Like and don't get me wrong, obviously it's mainly his decision. Like clearly it is. So I'm not saying it's wrong if people feel upset about that to focus it a bit on him, but I do feel like it was like only him. And the club kind of said it was a club decision as well, and it does feel like sometimes maybe a key facet of that communication is missing. I can't tell you Clare Wheatley's incompetent. I've no idea. She might be mega competent. She might be super incompetent. No idea. And I'm not saying I should know that, but I do think Ali's question really hits at something like a more regular, or if she, like, there's a match day program for every home game and Jonas does his bit. If there was something from Claire in there as well, like I agree with Ali. I think, and while there's a void, speculation will always fall into that void, and therefore people, when they're not hearing something, will just say, well, okay, it must be Clare Wheatley, it must be her that's wrong. And like, I do think particularly when the men's team were in a tighter spot a couple of years ago, Edu, Vinay Venkatesham did like 2 or 3 interviews with the club website every year. Or, look, we'll interview her on Arseblog. We'd love to do that interview angle for that a little bit. So, yeah, I think Alistair's got it right there in terms of, I don't think you can criticise someone unless you know really what's going on. And maybe that's just like a little bit of a black hole that needs to be fixed. That was my question to you, wasn't it? And then I ended up rattling on for ages.
No,
So why don't I ask you a question now so that I shut up for a minute? I mean, there's actually one about Victoria Pelova from Aaron Bliss, but I think you've addressed that one. So this is a good one, I think. And it's from Siddhant Bhatia on Twitter at SB Skelpy. New manager or not, how should the club and fan base recalibrate the expectations for the rest of the season? Is another Conti Cup and third place finish the bare minimum to avoid a top to bottom overhaul next summer? So where are you on what can and should we realistically, where should our aspirations now be for the season? Should they be different to what they maybe were a month ago?
Tim, you've gone back-to-back questions because you stole my question on purpose. So appreciate that. In terms of expectations, let's just be serious right now because they've played 4 WSL games. They're 4 points behind Chelsea. Chelsea have a game in hand. The league is looking very, very fickle because I think Caitlin Ford said to Sky Sports, forgive me if I'm wrong, after the game, we need to win every game from now on for the rest of the season to have a go at the league. And that is just fact. Think yesterday, Liverpool seemed to have City on ropes and Bunny Shaw kind of pulled out her brilliance to make sure that was okay and they got the 3 points there. So the league is fickle right now. I don't really know. However, again, I don't know if I can sit here and say, yes, Chelsea are going to win every game because I don't think that's true. I don't know if they've really been tested yet. I think they've been tested against Arsenal and Villa and they didn't pass the test in my eyes. However, they found a way to get the 3 points, which is something Arsenal can't do right now. So in terms of the league, very, very fickle. I'm not going to say it's over, pack up shop. However, doesn't seem very promising, if at all. In terms of expectations, I think they really, really, really need to really, really focus on the league, regardless of whether they're going for the title, because Champions League spots will be as competitive as ever this year. I think United have had a really strong summer. They've gone 3 for 3 in the league so far. Yes, they have to play Chelsea with that extra game. However, they looked really promising yesterday. It was 2 summer signings. It was Bizet and Turland that really lit it up, and that's not something we're seeing at Arsenal with the players coming in over the summer and looking really seamless. Bizet and Elizabeth Turlin yesterday were exceptional for United, and they've been at the club for a very short amount of time. So I think the league still needs to be a focus purely because of Champions League. Again, I don't know if Arsenal, the Champions League right now, we saw a buy-in. It's one of the giants of the league that you will need to be competing with in order to challenge for it, and it wasn't close in the end. So I don't want to sit here and be a big beacon of negativity, but that is what I'm feeling right now. And I'm thinking the FA Cup is something that Arsenal can have a really good go at this season. I don't know if we need to just always settle for the Conti Cup, because I think the FA Cup is something that Arsenal can have a really solid go at this year. Every person loves the FA Cup. I'm not saying it's a bad cup. I'm not saying it's the last one. I think I love the FA Cup. It's one of my favourite parts of football. So I think cup competitions is where Arsenal can go for silverware this season. However, there needs to be an ambition in the league to really still come out guns blazing, regardless of whether you are in the title race now or in May. It needs to be a minimum expectation, like Beth Mead said, for Arsenal to be in the Champions League. But I think it's going to be as hard as ever this year for that spot.
Yeah, I think realistically in the league, that's where we are. Try and finish in the top three, and then there's the 3 cup competitions, and something even 2 seasons ago when the league title wasn't really an aspiration and we won the Conti Cup, but that run to the Champions League semi-final, I think that's what people really remember from that season, and it feels something like that. Was that my question to you? Yeah, so you owe me a question now, right?
Okay, let me find my backup question. Here it is. Okay, this is from Lana at Lana Woso. There are a few standout player pairings that seem to have good chemistry and work the ball well together. Lana's used the example of McCabe, Mariona, Fox and Ford, Cadena and Williamson, in my opinion. Which player combinations do you enjoy seeing, and which ones seem to struggle, but Jonas still persists?
Yeah, I think the ones like Stina and Frida is a pretty established one, particularly when Arsenal are going to be a bit direct, like they were against Manchester City. I think once things settle down a little bit with Mariona and she really finds her place in the team, I do think there's a lot of potential for Mariona and Katie McCabe, kind of with Mariona coming in field and Katie McCabe on the overlap. I think that potentially can and could get the best out of them. I think with the centre-back partnerships, I think they're all quite 7 out of 10 as partnerships. Like we had some questions about whether Lotta and Leah works. I've never maybe I haven't looked closely enough. I haven't really ever had the impression that it doesn't work. I do think that maybe Arsenal miss a really aerially dominant centre half. Like when they won the league, they had Louise Quinn next to Leah. After that, they had Jen Beattie next to Leah. They had Hafaeli next to Leah. Like maybe we do miss that really aerially commanding presence. Naomi Girma, London's lovely. Check it out, for example. So I think maybe the centre back partnership. Yeah, maybe that's missing like another really proper kind of partnership somewhere, but I don't think there's anything wrong with either of them either. So I think really the future of this Arsenal team rests a little bit on that midfield double pivot, really, like we've talked about. And Victoria Palova to come back in, there's going to be a passing of the torch pretty soon. And so what does the future of that midfield double pivot look like? At the moment, it looks like that's probably going to be the job of another manager, though. So I think that's really going to shape the next iteration of this team. Why don't we go one more each? Because I've got not quite a fun question, but a slightly lighter question from our Discord from Boston Folks Say Saka. And it's always enjoy a good hypothetical on podcasts, me too. If you could bring back any player from Arsenal women's history at their peak, who would you bring in and how would they help to fix the current team?
I feel like you should have briefed me on this question. I feel like I've been caught out here. I don't appreciate it. Okay, why don't you go first? Let me think.
Okay, because there's the Viv Miedema answer. If you want to be mischievous about it, I've got a couple of answers to this. My actual answer is Kelly Smith, because if you're talking about your attack being a bit wonky and your strikers lacking confidence, hello, Kelly Smith will solve that for you. In her prime, I mean, argument, it's certainly the best Arsenal player ever, probably the best English women's footballer ever. So that. I think that's a pretty easy one. I think also I would maybe have a secondary answer of prime Jordan Nobbs. I'll always say that because Jordan's one of my favourite players. Congratulations to her, by the way, for breaking the WSL appearance record. But I also just think that kind of energy from central midfield would be really, really useful. There's a player who tries the difficult things in the difficult scenarios as well. Very creative, tries shots from range. Like, I feel like if things are broken, Jordan Nobbs, has that kind of sense of individuality, perhaps, that we don't always see in the team. So my actual answer is Kelly, but my secondary answer is Jordan Nobbs. Like I say, I think you could say 2019 Vivian Miedema would be pretty handy right now, but go on, have a crack at it.
I don't know about you, Tim, but there's a player in the NWSL that scored a hat-trick last night. So we're talking about...
Well, Chloe Lacasse, yes.
No, I'm just joking. I just want to preface it and ease some minds for Arsenal fans as well in terms of that game. I cover Seattle Reign for Sporting News, and they are really, really poor lately. And they also had a send-off. Angara James got sent off in the 14th minute. So they were playing against 10 men. So if any Arsenal fans are really, really panicking about Chloe Lacasse, I don't know if it's necessary. But I'm going to say, Tim, I think you're right. I can try to be niche and unique, but I'm just going to say they need a 9 right now that is going to bang in goals. And Kelly Smith at her prime was the best to ever do it. So it's probably the one. However, I think that, sorry to break hearts, because I know I've seen so much discourse about this, especially from one fan in particular. Viviana Miedema in 2019 scored goals like with her eyes closed, and it was that confidence, and we can speak about that in a little bit more of a negative note right now in terms of Stina and Russo, and they're not taking the chances that they are brought with. It's not even about that Man City game in the first opening round of the WSL when they were missing chances. It's now kind of about they're not really taking the responsibility because they're so low on confidence. And I think a 9 right now that could just take a shot out of nowhere and make something happen when the team aren't performing particularly well, that's exactly what Arsenal need right now. So I'm going to say Viviana Miedema when she was the Golden Boot winner. So sorry, guys.
Please I mean, Arsenal got a good striker history. Jodie Taylor. She's still there. She's still at all the games. But Julie Fleeting, Marianne Spacey, quite a lot of good goal scorers. But go on, let's have a last question from you then.
Okay, give me 1 second. Okay, this is another one on the strikers, Tim. I thought it's from @iHeartAWFC. I thought we had our best run at the end of last season and our best last performance against Häcken at home. A lot of these games, Russo was in the 10 and Stina was in the 9. Is this the best combination going forward? And what are your thoughts on this particular setup?
Yeah, I'm less enthused about it on a long-term basis. I think there are maybe individual games where it works. I do think maybe a part of the problem for Arsenal is the sense of chopping and changing, attacking-wise, that I wrote about this a lot over the summer, like the number 10 position in particular. Like no one's held that really under Jonas, other than when everyone was injured and Frida Mornan played there. It's like it's been a bit Viv played there, and then a bit Frida played there, and then a bit Kim played there, and a bit Russo played there, and now we've got Mariana starting a game there. Like I think that number 10 position, you do need to rotate. You do need to have different scenarios, different solutions, different combinations. But like I said earlier, it really feels like actually what we're seeing is that it's a lack of combinations, which is why we're seeing the kind of chopping and changing a bit and the going back to Beth and Caitlin as wide players, which in isolation against Chelsea, I understood because of the fullback situation for them. But I'm not sure I like Russo totally as a 10 to play there all the time. And I do feel a bit like a lot of fans kind of say that because they're not confident in her scoring enough goals. I do think there is a really, top class number 9 in there. I do. I am a bit worried about how quickly she's lost confidence because I kind of think your great number 9s just don't really do that. But like I said, she's not the only one. So I wrote about this a couple of weeks ago. Sometimes I feel like the Russo Blackstenius situation, as much as it's good to have two really, really good strikers, I do also feel like the line's a bit blurred there, and we're going backwards and forwards between the two. And actually, sometimes what you need in that position is like, this is the firm striker that we bet the family silver on. Look at Bunny Shaw yesterday. Like, Man City weren't great. I don't even think she had an amazing game, but she scores 2 goals and Man City win 2-1 and everyone goes home, and that's the end of it. Like, I sometimes think you really need that fixity in that position, and I just think almost any question about the attack at the moment is just coloured by the fact that we seem to be trying to do different things, and the reason we're trying to do different things is because none of them totally work. So I don't know, maybe if you do that like 20 times in a season, maybe it really does click and maybe it really does work. I'm slightly dubious about it, though. I think there's something, I guess, to wrap this podcast up a bit, I think with Jonas, I think like I've said before, as a tactical micromanager, he's really, really strong. Usually I think he's got a very good feel for tactical situations, but like when you're a manager, the big picture stuff is what really gets you through a league season, when it's just like 60 to 70% of our games are about us playing our style and going out and imposing it. And I guess I just don't really still have a feel for what our attacking style is, and never fully have done. It always feels like it's been a bit thumbing around the edges at things. So that might work over a season. I'm slightly dubious, but then I don't really have an answer here other than like something needs to change attacking wise. So yeah, I'm not really clear on that one, but then I'm not really clear on anything attacking wise. What do you reckon, Jamie?
Yeah, I'm on your page with that one, Tim. I think for me, I'm holding out hope for Alessia Russo because I think at her core and her skill set, she's an excellent footballer. And right now it's confidence. But it's interesting what you said, Tim. I hadn't really thought about that. Like, the best number 9s, like, you don't need this long to come back from a lack of confidence. So I don't know if her in the 10 is the answer, in my opinion. I think there's much for her to provide as a lethal number 9. I just think there is so much movement that needs to happen, and so much. There's not a philosophy right now in Arsenal, it doesn't feel, especially in the attacking third. And I think that needs to be set up, and those foundations need to be built in order for Alessia Russo to perform at her best. I don't know about her and Stina playing together. I think it's like, oh, we've got 2 good strikers, let's put them on and that's how we're going to win. And that's just, that seems a bit surface level to me. So I don't know, because I really respect them both as players. But you're right, Tim. All the best teams really have one number 9 that they rely on, and they've got a really good bench. And maybe Chelsea women are a bit of an exception in that regards, because they've got Macario, Ramirez, Kerr, Fischl, but they're ridiculous. Let's not sit here and lick our wounds about that. But I agree. I don't know if it's a partnership that I'm going to be putting on the map every single week as one to win, because I also think it takes away from what Frida Mornham and Rosa Kafaji and these players can offer the starting 11 as well. So I'm not going to say that's the answer. However, like you said, nothing really seems to be the answer right now. So some wholesale changes and a lot of foundation building seems to be necessary.
Yeah, really, I think what I'd be looking at is I'd want Frida and Rosa to kind of own that number 10 position a bit between the two of them. And I think Russo sometimes playing there muddies that water even further, to be honest. But yeah, look, this was never going to be the cheeriest podcast. It would have been a complete fabrication if it was. But I hope, as listeners, you found that at least a little bit therapeutic, trying to make sense of where things are at the moment. Jamie, therapy for you, hopefully?
Felt less therapeutic to last week, sorry, but it did feel a little bit cathartic. I'll take it.
Okay, well, we will be back with another episode next Monday after, obviously, Arsenal play Vålerenga at home on Wednesday evening in the Champions League. And if they don't win that, I think it really is time to burn everything down, quite frankly. And then away at West Ham next Sunday, which fortunately Arsenal have been brilliant there the last 2 seasons and had great... Oh, no, they haven't. That's right. But we will come back after the game in Dagenham against West Ham next Sunday with another episode. Until then, I'm going to sound a bit like Jerry Springer here, but take care of yourselves and each other. We'll speak to you next week.